So I want to read something to you that I wrote about this recently. I was asked to write an article for a scholarly book, which is, this book is about Judaism and postmodern poetry. It's a literary critical book. It turns out that many of the writers and thinkers who developed postmodern thought, surprisingly enough, were Jewish. Isn't that surprising? and most of the thinkers and writers, just as most of the thinkers and writers, but many of them who are sort of seminal in the development of modernism were also Jewish. People like Freud and so on. So it seems that postmodern poetry's sense of language and how language ought to be worked with in the poem has a lot to do with a basic Jewish understanding of language and Torah. So that's what this book is about, different articles by different people about this. And they asked me to write about it, not as an expert on Judaism, but because they thought that something that should be included in this discussion was silence. Zen meditation being a form of practice of radical silence. So what does silence have to do with all this? So they wanted me to write about this. So this was pretty easy, you know, Judaism, Torah, poetry, silence. So, fortunately, I passed the test and I have my poetic license. So with my poetic license, I can do things like this. Despite not knowing too much. That's the great thing about having a poetic license. I recommend it. So my article, which I'm not sure if they'll publish it, you know, but I wrote it. And it's called Language, and then in parentheses, it's one word, language, in parentheses, silence, word. So I'm going to read the part of the article that's about Torah, because that's what we're talking about this weekend. So, now I'm talking here, and this is sort of in the middle of the article. I'm going to read a small part of it. I'm talking about, it turns out that Jeff was talking about the Zohar, and so I was reading up about this, and the Zohar, what I read was that the Zohar was the first Kabbalistic book to be published, I mean, open. Before that, Kabbalah was always esoteric and secret. And the reason why the Zohar was published openly was because it was in reaction to the power of the Rambam, who was contemporary. The Rambam was an Aristotelian and a rationalist, and he was really influential in promoting a rationalist interpretation of Torah, which from the point of view of the Kabbalistic masters was the worst possible thing that could ever happen. So they thought we better marshal our ammunition and publish something that people can read. So that's how the Zohar is written. Now, according to the Rambam, the purpose of Jewish observance was not to praise God or somehow appease God, because the Rambam's concept of God, why would God need our praise? Why would God need us to? If God was beyond all this, God didn't need that from us. So the purpose of Jewish worship and observance was for us, to educate us, to tame us, to improve us, so that we would eventually be capable of stopping being so stubborn and get in line with the divine plan, which was, you know, universal goodness and peace and everything. So God didn't need any of this, but we needed it. That was the Rambam's view. And the Kabbalists hated this idea, because they thought it was exactly wrong. To them, the Rambam's concept of Judaism as a gradual path of human self-improvement trivialized the tradition. In contrast, they saw Jewish daily observance as a desperately urgent mechanism for revolutionizing the cosmic order, which in its fallen state was perilously close to endlessly being lost without possibility of redemption. So this was a desperate situation, and every act of worship absolutely mattered. And the idea that gradually we were going to improve, ourselves, and that this was what it was about, was anathema to the Kabbalists. Whereas the Rambam saw God as an impersonal philosophical necessity. Of course God existed, and the Rambam was a faithful Jew, but not in the way that we would think of it. The Kabbalists didn't look at it that way at all. For them, God was intimately, even personally, wrapped up within the world and within human contemplations, actions, and language, especially Jewish actions and language. So, Jewish religious acts were constantly and crucially critical to the fate of the world. And for those of us who are neurotically compelled to do good deeds, probably that's why. So the burden of the Kabbalistic cosmology that we often hear about is this mysterious and direct correspondence between this world and the world above, between human action and the divine plan. And you all know, about the legend about this divine sparks and so on. The world has gone, something went wrong from the beginning of creation, and it's our job to return the sparks and save the world through our daily actions. Whereas where the Rambam and his followers were reasonably, nicely, patiently, wisely hopeful about the human future, the Kabbalists were constantly, urgently grasping at straws, desperately, every day. So, most of this I get from Arthur Green, who somewhere I wrote an introduction to the Zohar. And this is a quote from Green. To know God is a necessary condition of proper worship. Think about that, let that sink in for a moment. To know God is a necessary condition of proper worship. And on this, the Kabbalists and the philosophers, that is Rambam, agreed. Of course, the two camps differed radically as to the significance of the phrase, to know God. The Rambam and his followers thought this meant rational contemplation of texts. And to the Kabbalists, knowing God was an urgent personal matter of mystical union. And here's the point, which was achieved mainly through language-based ecstatic concentration practices. Most of the Kabbalistic practices were language-based, text-based, and they were obsessed with language. They were not only interested in analysis and interpretation. Study for them was not an intellectual act. It was a religious act. Because every word of text masked hidden depths that revealed operations crucial to the salvation of the world on a moment-by-moment basis. This was the sort of urgent task of their work.